Professor Wendy Wood, and you're watching Pete's Behavioral Insights and Theories.
Perfect. Okay, let's start with a really easy question, which is, what is a habit?
I think of habits as mental shortcuts. So they're shortcuts that we learn over time as we repeat a behavior and we reliably get some reward or get some positive experience. After a while, our brain connects what we did in that context to get a reward or some outcome that we're trying to achieve. So then all we have to do is be in the context and the behavior automatically comes to mind. So that habit is stored in our memory as an association between performance context, which is everything around you when you're doing something, and what you did, in the past at least, to get a reward. So when I make coffee in the morning, I stand in front of my coffee maker and I start to make espresso without thinking a whole lot about what I'm doing or how to do it or whether I want coffee this morning. Instead, I just start doing what I've done in the past that's been successful, and I can do it while I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for my day. So habits are very efficient, but they're really dependent on what we've practiced in the past, what we've done in the past. And habits tend to be relatively rigid. They don't change easily because they capture past performance, regularities in what you've done before.
Yeah, I think with that rigidity of habits that you mentioned is something which I found really fascinating about your work and reading your book, because I think, as I've spoken to you over the last couple of months, I think that I've become more convinced that habits are maybe the most important aspect of behavioral science, because they are rigid and because their impacts compound over time as well. And because in a way we are products of our habits, right? Like if I have a habit of overeating, then I'll probably gain a lot of weight. So do you agree with that point, that habits are really the most important part of behavioral science?
I do think they're a really important part, and one of the reasons why they're so important is because they're so pervasive. Research I've done following people throughout their day and beeping them every hour and asking them, what are you doing now? What are you thinking about? What are you feeling? What we found is that 43% of the time, people are repeating what they've done in the past in a given context. And they're thinking about something other than what they're doing. So that behavior is being automatically controlled somehow. They've outsourced control of the behavior onto the environment. And they're just repeating what they've done in the past, which makes habits such a central part of our day. We don't experience them because habits are part of our automatic, non-conscious way of responding to the world. So we don't have any experience of them, the way we experience our feelings, the way we experience the decisions that we make. But they're very pervasive, and they do, as you say, control an awful lot of the quality of our life, whether we're fit and healthy, whether we're productive, whether we have positive relationships with people. So many of these things are not like one-off decisions. They're things that you have to do over and over and over again in order to achieve a goal. So yeah, that's why I think habits are very important.
Yes, I totally agree. And we'll touch on some of those points about being healthy and being productive in a second. So I wanted to focus this video on your 3 bases of habit formation, which is kind of a very central part of your book. So the 3 bases were context, repetition, and reward. So let's start with context. So you can correct me if I'm wrong with my description of context, but I think, so the way I understand context is that it's quite a general term that refers to the specific situation or environment that we're in when we're supposed to engage in the behavior that we're trying to make into a habit. So it could be the physical location that we're in when we want to make the habit, or it could be the time of day, or even the people around us all constitute the context. Am I right in my description?
Yes, absolutely. Context is a very broad term that includes pretty much everything that surrounds you when you perform a behavior, when you do something. And these contexts can make our habits easier to learn or more difficult. So first thing you want is you want some context that's stable. For me, making coffee, it's always the same coffee maker. It's always coffee beans. I have the same grinder. So it's the same context in my kitchen in the morning. And that context means I don't have to think much about what I'm doing. If you had me make coffee with a different coffee maker, I'd be problem solving and trying to figure things out. Or if somebody else was there talking to me other than my husband, I'd have to be thinking about what to do. But that context for me is so stable, and that I just do the same things over and over again. Some contexts, though, make behaviors more difficult. So one of the constructs in the book that I talk about is friction, that there are some contexts that are sort of impediments to doing things. So, for example, my favorite study right now is a study on elevator use. It's an old experiment from back in the 1980s. And what these researchers were interested in is they were trying to get people to quit taking the elevator and instead take the stairs. So they did what most of us would think will probably work, which is they put up big signs. It's good for your health. Climb the stairs. Or save energy. Climb the stairs. No effect. What they did then is they thought, well, maybe there's some way we can change this environment somehow. So they slowed the elevator closing, the door closing down by 16 seconds. And that got a third of people to start taking the stairs instead of riding the elevator, because that small delay was friction for people taking the elevator, and they ended up shut them all into taking the stairs. And what was so wonderful is that 4 weeks later, when the experimenters put the elevator back to its normal speed, they found that that third of the elevator users continued taking the stairs because they form a habit to do it. It was easier, they practiced it, and they just did it without thinking. They weren't going to fuss with that inconsistent elevator. So that gives you an idea of time. Things that take a lot of time, that's friction. And so you want to make things easier on yourself, make them simpler. Distance is another kind of friction. A study of cell phones and how far people that track cell phones to figure out how far people traveled to a gym showed that, this was actually done by a data analytics firm, and obviously their interest was how far people went to the gym and how often. What they found is that if you travel a short distance, about 3.5 miles, you're likely to go 5 times a month. But if you travel over 5 miles, then you only go once a month on average. Again, showing us that distance, things that are too far away, it's friction on our behavior. And we're less likely to do things, and we're less likely to repeat them into a habit.
Yes, great examples there, and I love those. I love those studies as well. You have a lot of examples in your book about how seemingly like trivial amounts of friction can have large impacts on people's behaviors, because we just hate to be inconvenienced in the smallest of ways. But you also talk about what happens when we have big changes to our context. You call it the discontinuity of habits. So can you talk about what is the discontinuity of habits and how can people use it to their advantage?
Yeah, so people sometimes report if they're trying to quit a behavior like quitting smoking, they sometimes report that it's easier to do that when they go on vacation. It's easier to start that. And that's simply because they're being liberated in a way from their existing habits. And the same thing happens when we move house, start a new job, maybe end a relationship, that all of the habits that we developed in that old context are no longer being automatically activated. So we can make decisions then. It's like a window of opportunity to make decisions about what we want to do instead of just repeating what we've done in the past. Now, the downside is, of course, making decisions is effortful. It's tiring. It's one of the reasons why we find it difficult, right, to move. And people report feeling tired a lot and a bit overwhelmed because of all the decisions you have to make. That's what a life is like if you don't have habits. You have freedom to do what you want. The old behaviors are not being automatically activated. But then on the other hand, you have to exert effort and make decisions, which will slow you down a bit and make you tired. So those are sort of the trade-offs, and that's habit discontinuity. Research has actually studied people as they've moved house. I've studied students as they switch colleges, and what you see is that people lose habits when contexts change, and they are able to maintain them if they have strong enough intentions, but it takes effort. So you're not necessarily going to lose all of your old habits when you move. You may continue with some of them, but it will take you a little bit of effort.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to the second base of habit formation, which is repetition. So I think it would probably seem quite obvious to people that they need to repeat a behavior if they want to make it into a habit. But in your chapter on repetition, you talk about what is actually happening to that behavior and how it's stored neurologically when we repeat a behavior. Can you talk about that research?
Yeah, so habits are a certain way of learning. And you have a habit memory system. It's a particular neural connection system in your brain that stores things that you repeat. It's very different from the way our conscious minds work. What we're used to, which is we form an intention to do something, we carry it out, and we make things happen. Habit memories don't work that way. They pick up regularities in our experience. I sometimes think that habits reflect what is most important in our own personal experiences because they capture only the things that are repeated most often. So it's the things that you really don't want to forget. It's the idea that, you hear people say, if you once learned to ride a bike, you'll never forget how to do it. And it doesn't matter whether you learn other things, how to ski or how to surf in the ocean. You still remember how to ride a bike because that habit memory is encapsulated. It's not open to being changed. You can't, it's not like our memory of past experiences where the memory shifts slightly every time we retrieve it. Instead, habit memory sticks. And once you form a habit, it's very difficult to change it, unless, of course, you change the context, as you said, through discontinuity.
Yeah, yeah. So, say I'm trying to develop a new habit, and I've set up my context to make it easy, and I'm trying to repeat it, but then something comes up, and I miss one of the repetitions for some reason. So, like, say I'm trying to go to the gym, something comes up at home, and I have to dash home, and I can't go to the gym that day. Does that completely ruin my habit formation process?
No, that's one of the great things about habit memory is when you pick up and start again, it's about at the same level as when you quit. So habit memory really does, it's iterative, it builds on what is there. And you don't lose it very quickly. In fact, some researchers think you never lose habit memory, that it's always there, ready to be activated when you're back in the same context. So as you're learning a habit, that gives you a little bit of flexibility. You don't have to rigidly do it every day exactly. You can miss a few days and then just pick up again. It's forgiving that way.
I think that helps us feel a lot better about ourselves, I think. Okay. Okay. So we've set up our context to make engaging in the good behaviors easy and to make the bad behaviors hard. We've now started to repeat the behavior, but you say that that's not quite enough for us to make habits yet. We have one more base to cover, which is rewards. So how do rewards play into habit formation?
Yeah, rewards are really important for several reasons. One is that you're just much more likely to repeat behaviors that you find fun than behaviors that aren't much fun. One of a great example of this, I think, is a study that was done with people and their New Year's resolutions. It contacted people 3 months after they'd made resolutions to see which ones they'd stuck with. And what the researchers found was that people stuck with resolutions that they viewed as fun. They didn't stick with the ones that they viewed as more life-changing, which is really surprising in some ways, because that's why we make resolutions, right, is to change our lives. And so you'd think that those would be the really important ones that people would stick with. But it wasn't. It was the ones that were fun, because that leads us to repeat behavior. It's a basic feature of our psychology, is that we're just much more likely to do things that we enjoy than things that we don't. So find some way to make the behavior fun. And it needs to be fun as you're doing it. It can't be something that you reward yourself at the end of the week if you go to the gym 3 times this week. It has to be something you experience. That fun has to be part of the gym experience itself. And that's because habit formation involves dopamine. Dopamine is that neurochemical that's released when we get a reward. It's sometimes called the feel-good chemical, but it does many things in addition to that. But it's released when we do a behavior that we enjoy, and it's part of what helps to build that habit memory. And dopamine works for about a minute to tie together all of the information about where you are, what you just did, what the reward was that you just got, that consolidates into a habit. So you want to make sure that that dopamine release is happening at the right time, which is when you're doing the behavior. That's going to help you learn a habit. That's why rewards, immediate rewards, are so important.
Yeah, you're answering my questions before I asked them. I was going to ask you about explaining dopamine next. Okay, you say that the best rewards are the ones that are intrinsic to actually doing the behavior, so they're internal rather than external. Can you explain why you say that?
Well, intrinsic rewards are things that you experience just by doing the behavior. So eating something you really like, exercising in a way that feels good to you, um, watching a movie or a concert that you really enjoy. Those are intrinsically rewarding, and you experience that enjoyment as you're doing the thing. Extrinsic rewards are things like money that might come at the end of the week, but aren't immediately tied always to the behavior. They can be. So people encourage themselves to work out. I do this. I encourage myself to use my elliptical trainer by watching ridiculous shows on TV or reading trash holes while I'm working out. And that actually makes me enjoy working out much more because it's tied to the behavior. And it's become a habit for me to do that. I don't watch those shows or read those books any other time. And so it makes it into a treat, something I look forward to. And it's now become a habit for me. So those extrinsic things can be part of the behavior, but you have to be careful about extrinsic rewards to make sure that they're immediate.
Yes, I find that advice really, really useful. Another thing that you said in the rewards chapter, which I thought was really interesting, was that some of the most powerful rewards are actually the rewards that are uncertain. Can you explain why that is the case?
Yeah, so we all have that experience of using a cell phone on a regular basis. And most of the time when we use our cell phone, we check our phone, we check social media, nothing interesting is happening. So most of the time it's not all that rewarding, but every once in a while we get this nugget of information or an experience that is really rewarding. And that keeps us going back, checking our cell phones. Tech companies know that people are very susceptible to intermittent, uncertain rewards. And they figured out how to use it to help control our behavior. But it's the same idea as casinos and slot machines, right? That people put money into slot machines just for the thrill of it. Because every once in a while they get a reward. Most of the time you get nothing. But people keep putting money in regardless. Because we're all very susceptible to these uncertain rewards. Dopamine is released most when rewards are uncertain. So one way to think about it, we all know this, is if you're in a relationship with someone, you have a partner, spouse, if you're trying to do something for them that they will notice, you don't do the same thing that you've done all along, even if they really like it. That won't be a real rewarding experience. Instead, you have to do something different, something that's novel. So if you always send flowers, sending flowers might be lovely, but it's not going to generate the same rewarding experience as something that's new and different.
Yep. Really, really interesting, really useful advice, that one, I think. Okay, so let's try and combine these three bases together. And I want you to help me with a case study, which I think a lot of us are experiencing right now. So the economy is quite bad right now because of COVID, and a lot of people have been made unemployed, or they can't find work. A lot of my fellow graduates can't find work because the economy is so bad. And so we're trying to get ourselves into the habit of applying for jobs every day. But I think applying for jobs is perhaps one of the least rewarding behaviors that you can do, because not only can you get rejected, but sometimes the companies don't even respond to your application at all. So how can we tinker with our environment to make applying for jobs a habit?
That's challenging because you're right. Intrinsically, that's a real anxiety-provoking thing to do. But structuring it into your day and adding additional experiences that can make it more rewarding might be a good way to go. So whenever you are most sort of on, whether it's early in the morning, late at night, differs for different people, carve out that piece of your day so that you just end up sitting at your desk automatically. You want to practice that, make that automatic. So you're sitting at your desk, your job application's open, maybe put on some music that you like. If it's in the evening, maybe pair it with a beer and don't drink beer otherwise. Sort of my theory about the elliptical. And try to focus on the benefits of just putting together an application. Don't worry so much about the consequences. You can't control that. What you can control is whether you apply and whether you have done so in a way that is thoughtful, tailored to the company, tailored to the job, that represents the best of you. So focusing on what you can control and making the experience as enjoyable as possible while structuring it into your day so that it's sort of a non-negotiable part of it. That's going to make it much easier for you to apply for jobs and keep doing so until you're successful.
Okay, I think that's a really good strategy you've given us right there. Thank you.
Let me say that I have some research I'm doing right now on how habits contribute to creativity that I think is relevant. That we have people practice their approach to doing a creative task over and over again until it becomes a habit. And other people have more sort of a open freestyle approach to solving problems that we encourage them to use, which is probably more like the way most people apply for jobs. They do it when they're feeling really strong and focused, and then most of the rest of the time they try not to think about it. What we found in our study is that people who have a habit of approaching the task in a certain way generate more solutions. But in addition, their solutions are more creative. So they're less focused on how should I approach this? Is this the right problem to be working on? Should I be working on something else? What kinds of strategies should I be using? That's all automated for them. And they can focus on the important thing, which is how can I be creative? Having a habit of having an application habit can potentially do the same thing for people in that they have already answered, am I going to do it? Am I going to procrastinate? What am I going to do? They've already figured all those things out, and they can focus instead on actually creating an application that will be effective for them.